Ivan, your presentation was so good. I'm so happy you managed to come. Any question? Fukami, do you have a question? Yes.
So one thing is a remark. You said that there are 3 ways for the path of conformity, but I think that you forgot one, that is common specifications. So in case when they are not ready, the Commission comes up with their own specifications. That is also a potential path for conformity.
Not sure that this is applicable for this one. This is in a critical category. Good point.
That leads to the second question. You said that TEE, for example, is not in that standard. So is that in 47X instead, or where are
we just had this open question yesterday in our internal talk, and maybe it is too early. Maybe it is too crazy, but I think that this one would deserve the new work item report, because trusted execution environment is somewhere in between now. Right? So it's not adequately covered in any of the standards. And that's my personal view. I don't want to speak for the community. This is really my personal view.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Ivan. So I'm actually part of the TC47X, and as far as I understood, so the trusted execution environment, of course, it's complicated topic, but the integrated secure element and integrated into MCU, MPU, this should be in the TC47X working group, as far as I understood. Correct?
Yeah, I would agree completely, but I think that first, before we talk, for the application on the integrated secure element, this would be pretty much the same. Okay, but the problem is, as I have, I don't know, a couple of years, 10, 20, 12 years working for semiconductors industry, NXP, Infineon, and so on, I know how difficult it is to make the physical isolation of the enclave on the chip, on the silicon, in order to make it secure and so on. So I think this is the one step afterwards.
Yeah, agree. Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ivan, same as you. So the question, you were earlier mentioning about the digital identity, you know, the ID cards, the banking cards, the EU wallet, for example, what they are mentioning doing it. And essentially, in one of the slides, you mentioned that the core component of all of the security is HSM. So with the recent EU law that came with 1943 and 1944, where they enforced the ETSI enforced the common criteria or FIPS standard for the certification, where was going in that direction for it? Because when they announced the standard to be implemented around the digital identity 2.0, they said you have like 20 days to enforce it across the whole EU. Looking it on the business side, always in 20 days, some of them cannot acquire the procurement team to figure out what they're going to order and at least how to implement it. So, you know, with those standards, where's your point of view of it?
So first, I was not mentioning HSM with any single word.
No, it was on the picture just as a part of the security elements to increase the whole security in general.
And you kind of triggered me now, because coincidentally, I'm also a security architect for a German EUD wallet since January 1st. There is clarity about it. The EUD wallet, and I'm only talking about this one, there are many ways how you can solve digital identities, has 4 particular ways how you can actually use it, how you can ensure the security of the identity. 3 of them are related to the secure element in the mobile phone. 1 is completely relying on the cloud and HSM. But all of them are having some interplay with HSM in the backend. If you want, we can talk about this a little bit more in depth in a break. I think actually I would like to say that technologically and technically we have all of the resources either on the device or in the cloud that can do the work properly.
Agree.
You have there two big challenges. One big challenge is actually performance. UD Wallet, it's not a simple context, not a simple architecture, or any digital identity context and architecture based on signatures and classical cryptography before we go into the zero knowledge proofs and so on. It has a degree of complexity that is impacting performance. So having things in the cloud, if it's a time critical application where you need to have authentication of the user very quickly, maybe, I don't know, it depends also on the runtime and so on. The second challenge with regards to the secure elements is basically you don't really have the easy access to them because the device that is manufactured by Apple, Google, Samsung, Huawei, Oppo, and so on. Great companies, really. But man, this is like a personal device. People were not buying this for the protection of the digital identities on a governmental level. Okay, so you know, this really depends on the readiness of the commercial entities to provide access to such a secure element. Okay, so
I agree, and as you mentioned in earlier phases, everything starts with the secure chip on the card, which was the point of your presentation. Some government issuing cards, you know, like an ID card or the passport, it starts with securing that chip. Yes, that's a physical chip and it needs to mean a lot of security. And yes, you're carrying with yourself. We're not speaking about the mobile phones, digital identity. We're speaking about that chip and you're carrying around. Where would you be your personal experience point with the standard going with the common criteria or the FIPS? Common criteria is EU standard, FIPS is more like a US standard, but with all of the elements, where would be your personal point? Which standard would be best?
So common criteria is a global thing. FIPS is definitely American. In Europe, we have EUCC. These are actually, I would not call them standards. They are schemes. They are standardized in ISO. I can have personal preferences as much as I would want to have, but EUCC is what Europe simply defined precisely for these purposes. So it's not like I have particular opinion. I just think that through standards that we are creating, directly the ones, for example, for a UD wallet, there's a protection profile that is evolving, by the way, for the WSCA. But also with Cyber Resilience Act, we can make this journey to obtain the certificate easier for manufacturers. That's the hard job now. Okay? But I mean, I would love to have preferences, but man, the law is written. So
thank you.
Great questions, by the way. Thank you for the challenge.
Any other question? It seems
lunchtime.
Okay.
Or not?
No, absolutely not. We have two presentations left before lunchtime. So at 1:15, we're having lunch, light lunch, because otherwise you will fall asleep. In the meantime, I kindly ask Daniel to come on stage. Thank you very much for being here with us today.
Hello, hello, hello. Hi. So I'm actually recycling my slides from last week because I've been traveling so much, I don't even have time to make new slides. And so today I'm going to introduce you a little bit to password managers. I'm not going to ask you if you use password managers because you all do. It's the 2026. By now, everyone uses password managers everywhere. You do use password managers. You use a browser, right? The browser, maybe the operating system of your phone offers to save passwords for you. Maybe create strong ones. Okay. you can't force people to do the right thing, but you can force the right thing to be better. And that's kind of what we're trying to do. I know we've talked a lot about the CRA from different perspectives. I think I can give you an even deeper introduction than what we've heard up till now, because I think it's really relevant to the approach we took for the password managers. And it all sort of comes back to, why are we doing this in the first place? We have a European market. On the market, people buy products. Anybody buy something today? I mean, we just talked about credit cards. You use a credit card to purchase a product. And the European market is regulated, and we have definitions of the market participants. We have manufacturers, we have importers, distributors, authorized representatives, we have the consumer, right? And the roles and responsibilities of each of these parties in the supply chain of creating a product and bringing that product to a person is what this is all about. And raise your hand if you're from the 90s or 80s, or maybe you were born in the 20th century. Okay, I'm going to just mention that's about half of the group. The reason why I'm saying this is because there was a time before the internet. There was a time before our lives were completely mediated by digital online calendars, by credit card statements. Who has a checkbook? Do you use a checkbook still? Some of us, okay, there's very few hands raised because, ledger technology, and I'm not talking about DLTs, I'm just saying that the automated systems are great and they help us understand how we've spent money. And yet, today we live in a world that is full of threats. Every single device is a potential vector that attackers can use to steal your identity, that they can use to steal your property. They can even enter your company's video chat and convince you that they are real people so that you give them your password, right? There was just a case a couple days ago, someone lost millions and millions of cryptocurrency value because they were convinced that the person they were talking to was a real person who had a need to get their private key, their passphrase to unlock their physical wallet, right? And there are ways to defend our users against this kind of thing, but I mean, if you know XKCD, you know that a $5 wrench is always going to beat the most impossible cryptography. And again, if you know XKCD, you also understand that password is not a strong password. You maybe want to use a correct battery staple horse or correct staple battery horse or these passphrases, but actually passphrases are dumb too. You should be using something better, but what is that? And so the idea of this vertical was that we wanted to define the product to make it clear that, if you are making a password manager, what that is. And we have a nice little definition. A product with digital elements is one that has an intended and foreseeable use, reasonably foreseeable use, we'll get to that in a minute, that includes direct or indirect data connection to a device or network. That's what a product is. But wait a second, if you think back to what I was just saying, a product is always a physical thing. It's a microphone, it's a bottle of water. Now we're saying that an immaterial object, code, potentially, is a product. And that's new, and that's why the onus is now on the manufacturer. That's why products are going to become more expensive, because you have to document your work. You have to show that you've made a secure product. And again, this has been covered by the other speakers till now. I think that the challenge that our friends that presented this morning, the products, the research from the CyberStand group, the challenge they're going to face is that today we know more about the Cyber Resilience Act than we did 3 years ago. But we're not done yet, right? Like just in the venue of open source, and this is actually going to be my discussion with you all today in the browser workshop. We're not going to talk about the standards so much. We're going to talk about the interrelation between open source, attestation, and product. I'm looking forward to getting some good discussions there. because it's not all written, it's not all done. I think that's an important thing to remember here. We have a deadline. Felipe showed us December 11th, 2027. The day after, if you don't have all your paperwork done, you are not admitted to the market. And it's very easy for the regulator to say, off the market, product dead. That they're going to do that more than they're going to fine people, because fines take a while. An implicit fine is one where you're not allowed to sell your product on the market in the first place. How do you get from a piece of legislation to a standard? Well, the commission wrote a standardization request. I took a little screenshot from that standardization request, and this is the phrase that you're going to hear a lot of, and this is why you want, or products should want, to choose a harmonized standard. The presumption of conformity is your friend. By going through all of this work, the dozens and dozens of rapporteurs involved in writing the various standards, they put this work in and they get it confirmed through a certain type of assessment done by the commission that if you are a manufacturer and you follow the guidelines, you assess the requirements, you provide evidence for your conformity, that you have attained the presumption of conformity. That's all you have to do. You don't have to do anything else, and you can put that CE marking on your product. The other options are less great. I mean, we know there's a gap with EUCC. That's the one that no one talks about. That's why it's a gap. And doing it yourself is an expensive project. I'm sure that there are going to be people who will then choose to go to our famous European German cabs and have them write up a fantastic assessment at a very high price. Again, we're here to talk about our standards. Again, they're optional. We only worked on important 1, important 2, and critical. For the important 1, which is what the password managers are, it's a module A type assessment, a self-assessment that you as a manufacturer can conduct yourself. You have a list of requirements that you choose based on something we'll talk about in a minute. And if you fill all the paperwork and you have all of your documentation on hand and you've done it appropriately, you attain the presumption of conformity and your product may then be on the market. So how do we bring this all into passwords? So a password manager is a product with digital elements that stores passwords locally on a device or on a remote server, including activities such as the generation of passwords, password sharing, integration with local or third-party applications for the usage of passwords. This includes, but is not limited to, local password managers with browser extensions, enterprise password managers, as well as hardware-based password managers. So what we have here is in the 2 parts of this definition of the product that was part of the commission implementing regulation, we have a definition and then we have some scenarios of use. But we had the problem, because when you work with the smartest people who do security, they're like, but Daniel, you know, passwords, they're kind of actually 20th century. You know, we do other things these days. So we had to adapt the language of our definition of the way that we interpret what passwords are in a way that is hopefully, we're still waiting on our feedback from the Haas assessment, hopefully appropriate in a way that is both in line with the expectations of the commission, but also following contemporary best practice, right? We talk about, this is the one I love. I can never say it right. I think it's IPRFU. It means intended purpose and reasonably foreseeable use. This is the thing that helps you define your product category. If your product does not have the intended purpose of storing passwords, managing them, that's not a password manager, it's something else. We added a couple additional things that might not seem so obvious if you're just reading the regulatory context. Accessing systems by people. This is about people. This is about human users. This is not about your AI necessarily. That's not the request we got. We got the request to provide a standard for password managers for people. There is one hot take. We're going to talk about this in depth at the workshop. So this is kind of a teaser for the workshop. And that is very nerdy. It's all about one-time passwords. And the question, should a one-time password be considered a password? Is that a secret? We're going to talk about that today because yes and no in German, I'd love to say jein. So it's like the one-time password itself is not a secret, but the material and process by which it is created is a secret. Right? That's why it works. And we also made it a point to exclude operating systems, browsers, and network infrastructure, except where there's explicit integration, because we had to draw the line somewhere. And we'll talk about this in the workshop today. The informative context of our draft goes into ways in which you are to understand the password manager itself. It's not normative. I think that's something we also haven't really talked about much today. There's several parts of these drafts that are distinct from each other. The informative section, which describes how we understand the thing that we're talking about, and the normative sections, which are the requirements and the methods of assessment, as well as a couple others, that define the things you shall do. Fun fact, in our standards, you will never find the word must, except in two places, where we say you may not use them. We talk about use cases, and because we weren't sure while drafting and we wanted to get the feedback of the Haas assessment, we have two different kinds of use cases. We have the deployment use case, and we have the actual, like, the way the user would use it in the real world. It's a very interesting nuance, and I'm happy to discuss that again at the workshop this afternoon, because the cold use case of the environment is not the same as a human and how they interact with it. And we chose for the latter because, again, we're here to protect people. After the informative section, we talk about the requirements. I've picked the first requirement out of a group of them. Again, like others, we chose the capability and condition approach, where, if you can't read it in the back, I'll read it out for you. The capability of master password authentication is that the password manager employs master password authentication mechanism for primary access control. We have a condition, and that condition is a null condition. This is kind of like what we also call an if-rec, if you care about that. The null condition is the master password authentication controls vault access. The threats are then listed, and we identify the risk, and then we have a requirement. The requirement is that one of the requirements. There's a couple for this capability, but the first one that I'm going to talk about, the requirement, is that the product shall implement a key derivation function, a KDF. And then the final part is, again, this is just one. This is the one I just described. The assessment, we reference it, we name it, what it shall do. We have a given, and these are the things that you bring to the assessment, that you have a password manager with debug instrumentation. You have access to configuration files and the ability to inspect the implementation details. The task is to verify that the password manager implements a key derivation function with minimum iteration count or equivalent computational costs as specified by ENISA. That should read ACM, but we'll talk about that later. And then you have the method by which you do the verification, the evidence that will be then collected to show that you've passed, and a differentiation between how to pass or fail such an assessment. This is the approach that all of the standards have taken. And then we have references to the document. We have both normative and informative references. I picked out one of our normative references, and this is something, again, that we'll talk about at my workshop later, or you can ask questions about it. But basically, to be brief, we have a challenge, and that is cryptography changes over time, and ENISA has declared through a document called the ACM the agreed cryptographic mechanisms, that at a certain point in time, certain cryptographic approaches will be sunset. They will be no longer viable, which means that in order for us to keep the standard up to date without changing the actual implementation, we can reference then this ENISA report because it's expected to be updated regularly. We also have several informative references because how are you supposed to do WebAuthn if you can't reference the W3C recommendation? We can talk about this maybe later. Finally, here are a few links. These QR codes go straight to the Cyber Resilience Act, the standard as it is currently written, the standardization request, which if you haven't read, I highly recommend reading it. It's quite informative, especially about open source. And then we have the technical descriptions. That's the document that then defines all of the standards, what they are. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you very much for your teaser. I'm really looking forward to know more during the afternoon session.
Yeah, I'm doing 2 sessions this afternoon, one on password managers, and then I'm covering for my colleague, Dan, who couldn't be here today, to talk about browsers. And I think that one of the things that we don't talk about enough is open source. So if you want to talk about anything with regards to the open source challenges of the CRA, come to the browser workshop and we can talk about it there.
Thank you very much. Any questions from Daniel? Oh, yes, please.
Hi, Daniel. This is Aziz. So, a quick question, and I'm sorry if it sounds dumb, but what is the difference to the if the password manager is local, saved, or online? How does it differ when it comes to the CRA?
That is a very interesting question. Thank you for asking it. I mean, originally we all thought that the CRA was only talking about products that had a component that was in the cloud partially or a remote data processing solution. We assumed that it had to have that kind of remoteness. Our understanding today, that might change with future guidance, but our understanding today is that even on a device, the communication from one part to another part can be seen as a quality of distance. And by this, it could be you have, to use the nomenclature, you have 2 microservices running inside of an application. Well, that's running inside of the application, so it's probably the same product, right? But it's still going to be considered a product with digital elements because it's obviously protecting personally identifiable information and stuff like that.
Exactly. So it's going to be a weakness in the cryptography in that sense. If we got, for example, if let's say in some instances they got access to compromise the encryption keys that use in the password manager, and that could lead to the compromise, and that's does not meet the let's say the password management cybersecurity requirement. Because I'm saying this because at Cyan, I mean at the Confirmate, we drafted the penetration testing, CRA aligned penetration testing methodology, and I really found difficulties there to see how we can secure test the password managers, especially when it comes, because we have a hybrid mode and we have a on-premise mode, which just make it a little bit. And I was wondering if you could maybe help with that.
My current thinking is when you have a cloud component or a remote component, that our remote data processing solutions hook gets pulled in. And the way that we're seeing this, and we're working on it as a group right now with the RDPS, it's actually going to be called NXR. And with NXR, when you have a remote piece, you also have additional requirements of protecting the integrity, the availability, et cetera, of the data in transit. So you might not actually, as a manufacturer, own that remote product. And in fact, we've been given guidance that if you use a third-party service provider, it might not even be a remote data processing solution. I know, like challenges. However, what you can always do is you can say, I am consuming this resource remotely, and then you add requirements that serve to verify that the manufacturer has protected the ingress and egress across that boundary. And I would say you can do the same thing on a procedural level within your own application. And again, this kind of comes back to the whole idea of modern architecture, because it's very, very rare that you have a product that is only local on one machine. At the very latest, when you need to get an update.
Exactly. And the funny thing is the one that saves locally is the most secure one. Others get compromised. The one that saves locally are, I think, in my humble opinion, I think they are the most saved password managers. But thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Only look.
You cannot clearly distinct, like very often, like the
Fukami, could you
level of
start
what is
over,
allowed.
please?
So what?
Could you start over? I couldn't quite hear the beginning of what you said.
So the assumption that something on a local host is more secure than not is, in my point of view, a very, very, let's say, strong assumption that it's very likely wrong, because every part of your operating system or anything on your local host that has access to your local database can potentially take all of your passwords. That is not the same case if you have something externally that where you just provide the key. You understand, like, you know, the primary attack vector against passwords is a local attack vector. It's not necessarily what you have in a network.
What about the likelihood of both being compromised? The
Look,
likelihood?
the classical thing is, let's say, like, you know, macOS or Windows. So when you have a program that requires you to unlock your vault, there's a high likelihood that they can take out that password, like not only that password, but all of the passwords, or that they can observe what is happening. And this is why it is not necessarily more secure, just as a...
Yeah, exactly. The reason I say that comes from the previous incidents that happened for the password managers. I do not, maybe I missed it, but I do not recall an incident where a locally hosted password manager was compromised and leaked. But I remember during my mission, because I'm a CTI, I was a CTI analyst, and I do remember some incidents related to the password managers being leaked. One of them was, if I'm not mistaken, it was one passport it's called, and it was leaked. So that's why the reason that I said, I put that assumption that the locally one, we do not have any, or at least the one, maybe I have missed it, but I do not recall any incidents that they were first.
I love dialogue, and I don't want to shut this down. I want you to come to my workshop this afternoon, and let's talk about it, because I think also, just as a little bit of conversation from the inside of our working group, we had this discussion already, and it was determined that this is security theater, right? Protecting the individual laptop is, let's put it a different way. If there is a motivated attacker and they are in the device, none of your protections matter. And so the solution is probably an architectural one. So happy to have that discussion later. Thank you both.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Daniel. I want to welcome on stage Fukami for the last presentation of this morning session. And the presentation will be on boot managers.
Yeah, I'm also taking the slides from the meeting last week on boot managers, and it was like a deep dive session to introduce that. Just a short introduction to myself. I'm Fukami. I work as a colleague of Daniel for Grep Nebula in Malta. My background is offensive security, so that's also the reason why I deal with that subject, because boot managers are a very interesting part when you look at it from an attacker's perspective. Yeah, it's like I go through the standard in like, you know, how it's built, what is in there. But first start is, but let's start first with why are boot managers such a special piece of technology? The problem is, so on one hand, every piece of hardware has a boot manager in one form or another. So there is no piece of hardware that exists that does not have that component. On the other hand, you do not have a lot of products that are actually boot managers on the market. So that means like it is not that that is not an off-the-shelf product, like for example a router or a firewall or like even like a secure element. So on the other hand, you have, like a lot of open source, a lot of integration, a lot of internal code that is built for the devices that are built by a manufacturer. But again, there is a lot around like the specificity of that item, because if it gets compromised, it has always an impact on the whole system. It can hide from operating system, it can hide from antivirus once it is installed and in a way that is like under the level that is easily accessible by a system. And once that happened, it's very, very hard to get rid of it and to even detect it. So what is the boot manager in the CRA? It is explicitly mentioned in the Annex 3 as an important class 1. It is also, there is a technical description that has started to use, is that actually with, no, it's not. That includes in the last version UEFI. I'm a little bit unhappy about this because it gives the impression that it is all about UEFI, but it is not just about UEFI. There's like all type of like boot architectures are actually fall under it, not just the weird stuff UEFI does that. And then we have the sanitization request itself that also mentions boot managers, and our slime item 23. That's the reason why that boot manager number is the number 623. And it is in ETSI, the work item 008. We had a little bit of a discussion already around what the conformity assessment is. And for boot managers, same like for browsers and a couple of others, where you have that thing where you have a lot of like open source things. So you have these categories that are all not, it's not important, and critical is not so much is that product important, it just only refers to the conformity assessment that you need to have for that product. So for important class 1, that means if you use a harmonized standard or a common specification or a EUCC scheme, you don't need to go through a third party. That's basically the benefit of important class 1 standards, because it is a matter of, more like, 30, 40, 50,000 euro, that you pay or not if you have a important class 1 product on the market. So therefore, it is an important, interesting standard, or like the groups of the standards for these type of important products. In terms of, just a little remark, in terms of open source in general, that also accounts for important class 1, for example, hypervisors. If you have an open source hypervisor, which is a important class 1 product, you still can do conformity assessment, self-assessment when you use a harmonized standard. So little overview over what the structure of that standard is. So the first part are the main clauses. The most important one of it is clause 5, that these are the requirements, and the requirements are normative. So this is a part that is the most important of each standard. And then we have the annexes, and there the most important part is Annex A, that is the mapping between the CRA essential requirements and the requirements in that standard that are mostly in clause 5. I think it's in all standards in clause 5. And then we also added a couple of other things, for example, a mapping to NIST 800-193, because that is something that is very widely used by the industry as a baseline for firmware resiliency, so that we took that in order to give manufacturers a good understanding of how the requirements actually map to what's already there. And so the idea with all of these standards, not just with this, was not to come up with something new, but to integrate stuff that is there and to make, you know, the known best practice actually part of that standard. Like with all standards, there is a scope that needs to be clearly defined. Here we have a scope that is very clearly a kind of the boot components of a system, and that expands a little bit to firmware components. What the problem is a little bit is, so the standard and the CRA uses the term boot manager, despite if it's like actually a boot manager or firmware or a bootloader or whatever. The other thing is also that the regulation talks about loading into an operating system, so from power on to, you know, like hand over to an operating system, but the boot manager can operate in between that, either by, you know, like handing it over to something else. It's not necessarily like an operating system, can also be another bootloader, or it can also be loaded from something else then just after the power on. So that means we have a relatively large scope, and we have also an aspect that is not in each standard, that is immutability. So because we have components that we can't change after the manufacturer gives it out of hand. So that means the question is, can these things even have a presumption of conformity? What we also included, but it's not deeply integrated, that is, these are runtime services, so everything that happens around boot, but happens during runtime to the boot manager. So, for example, configuration is such a thing, or attestation. We use basically the three different boot architectures. We use the term verified vis-a-vis unverified. So I know that, you know, not everybody uses that term verified boot. That is like, but it is synonymous with secure boot. That's also like, or the way how that is actually implemented technically can vary greatly. So what we did is to come up with a relatively kind of simple way of defining an unverified boot. So that means like without any cryptographic verification, verified boot with that verification, and then measured boot to have non-blocking execution. And of course, there is like a mean that these can also combine, especially like verified and measured. The boot manager, like all of the others, and what Ivan already said, is we had that agreement that we use capabilities as one way how we structure our requirements, because that is like two parts. I come to the first part next. That is about so risks come from the capability of a product. And the connection is twofold. On one hand, you can say a capability can be used to mitigate a problem, or also a capability can introduce a new problem. So that is something to consider with every requirement that we have. So that means later on, like in the part is really, oh, what does it do? Do I have it in my product? And if yes, you know, like what does it trigger as either a requirement or what is like a mitigation to that? What we also have, but it is not extremely strongly, I would say, integrated in that standard because it is very, very difficult to determine also for a manufacturer, but it is like operational factors or like, you know, the operational environment and things that play a role there, and they have an impact on security, but they are not necessarily very strongly under control of a manufacturer of a boot manager, but more of an integrator or of a manufacturer of a higher level device or something like this. Sorry. The other thing that we have are assets. I need to be a little bit quick, don't I? Oh yeah, I'm sorry. So we have the assets that is like basically keys and password credential stuff and the actual code. We have threads that that are, you know, like relevant to boot managers, and I took the effort to actually have a very elaborated and detailed threat model, because my idea was, due to the way how boot managers are integrated into products, they have a very special kind of role when you look into the threat model of devices. And the idea was to have, on one end, the threats, then like CVEs and so on, in order to see if we actually, or if the requirements are actually would cover CVEs that are known. So for example, Pixie fail or logo fail or whatever, that do our requirements actually address these type of known vulnerabilities? And this is where that threat catalog that we have, that actually, I think, valuable, still needs to be reviewed a little bit better, because there are not very many people who looked at it so far. The part that is very important for each standard, that is how you determine the risk, because that determines what requirements apply. So what we choose here is that we have 2 impact factors. If any of those is 3, it is high risk. The impact factors are data or safety. That means if a boot manager, or like if a manufacturer produces a boot manager that is meant to be in a safety environment, it is automatically high. If it is meant for something that carries, for example, personal data, medical data or whatever, it's automatically high. It doesn't really matter what the impact factor is. If I have something that is not in these high impact scenarios, but still has a high impact, that can also become high risk due to the way how we calculate the likelihood factors. And if they get over a certain threshold, then even if I have a medium impact, I may still have to apply or should apply high risk requirements. The high risk requirements are then, or the requirements in general, they are fine-tuned, but I will like actually show that, I think. No. The next one is use cases. So this is how that applies. When I, or like how, after I determined my risk level, I can say, okay, it's low, so I have these type of requirements. And the use cases are just an example of how that would usually apply for, like, you know, if I'm a manufacturer of an immutable embedded system for a sensor, I could assume that's a low risk. That's a low risk product, so the low risk requirements would apply. The requirements themselves, there are, we have like 10 categories and altogether 92 requirements, but most of them are tied to integrity and availability. So the major kind of focus that, or like, yeah, what the boot manager's responsibility basically is. To give an example of how they look like, we actually use that form of telling the requirement and then an extra line that says applies to, and then low risk boot or high risk boot managers with configuration capability, for example. So to have a very like fine-tuned way of requirements that is meant to only fit into fit for the capabilities that really exist. So if I do not have a configuration capability, then that requirement just does not exist. It's that simple. Then we have the conformity assessment part. Daniel already showed a little bit how that is. It's like here the same. The only difference that I have here is that it is more grouped, and we have grouped that for the low, medium, and high assessment part. So that means low is only like, doc review, easy functional test, and the higher the level gets, the more rigid the test is going to become. And then we have the annexes. What was already mentioned is ACM, so the accepted cryptographic methods. In the moment, we also link to the ENISA document, but what we want to do is what's called Annex K. The idea here is that it also includes national cryptographic catalogs. For example, I know in Germany, the BSI has something like this. Probably each member state have, like some form of that. So that is meant to be included. And also, especially for boot managers, there might be cryptographic algorithms that are not in there in the ACM, but that are used by boot managers also due to their specific constraints that they have. And the ACM does not really recognize or acknowledges the different types of products where these cryptographic keys play a role. Yeah. So this is basically how you would, if you are a boot manager manufacturer, would determine what, how, and if your product complies. So the first thing is that you say, oh, is my product in scope? So you look at, is that a boot manager that falls under that scope? Then I would describe my architecture capabilities to get an idea of what my boot manager can actually do. Document the operational environment that it is meant for. Look at the risk factors, determine the risk level, and then I apply the requirements. And at the end, do the, prepare the evidence over the documentation, and then have the actual test. So, and then afterwards, I do the declaration of conformity. The timeline that we have actually aligns to everything else. It's, we have now the mature draft 0012, and the moment what we do is that we collect everything that comes with comments until the HAS review comes back, and then match both. And to see how that's actually going to be. We still have open question. I already mentioned NXK. Then there's also the other point with like, how do the standards, it's not just a problem with the boot managers, but with all of the standards, how do they, like the horizontal and vertical standards align? And also we have done some things where you have like cross vertical things that where they're really tightly connected to each other. Vulnerability handling, especially for boot managers or everything that where the manufacturer has no direct way of updating. And for boot managers, it's not that it is like calling for an update server. So usually you have an operating system or an operator or an administrator that does that, like on an update in this type of technology. Yeah, that is basically it. Like, you know, compressed from an hour to like, I don't know, 15 minutes or something, 20? Yes. So yeah, is there any question?
Yes, please.
Tim Technology.
Thank you. Yeah, Pukami, thank you very much for this very good presentation. I do have a question. So my name is Tim Scherer. I'm with Microchip Technology. What would you suggest to manufacturers of products where there is a boot manager included in their product, but the product they sell itself is not a boot manager? Should they follow this standard to make sure that the boot manager in their final end product is secure, whatever you would call it? Or is it just doesn't matter because it's not the actual product which is in scope of the CRA? Yeah.
So the most important part to understand is if you have a product that has a standard, so let's say, for example, a chip standard for MPUs, MCUs, then you follow this standard for the MCU, not the standard for the boot managers that is only informative for you in a way to see, oh, is that even, you know, like, you know, for interest or whatever. But it is, you follow the product standard of the product that you put onto the market, because that is what at the end gets CE marked. However, if you have something that does not have a standard, then it becomes interesting to use this and other standards in order to draw up your conformity. You do not have the presumption of conformity because you only get that for a product standard and your product is in that category. If you have a product that is not in these categories, then you cannot have the presumption of conformity for the simple reason that it is a way how the harmonization works. But you can use it to say, okay, I take the boot-related parts from the boot manager, I take the operating system-related part from the operating system standard, the part for the, I don't know, like the interface, like the network interfaces from the interface standard, and then draw up my conformity and say, these are the requirements that I follow for my product. But at the end, you know, when someone comes and asks, so market surveillance, for example, then you have to, you know, like have kind of plausible what you actually did there.
Think of a smart home system, a camera which has a boot manager included.
Has an own standard. Yeah. The IoT standards cover this. They should cover boot if boot is a problem for, or like is something that you know, like could compromise their security. And in the moment, and this is like the thing that is a little bit due to the time pressure that is there for producing the standards, we are not at that stage where you would easily say, okay, this standard can integrate the requirements of another standard. That is something that takes a lot more time, a lot more fine-tuning, and it is not in the first round of CRA standards. In the moment, it is really like setting it up for the future, I would say. The first round of CRA standards will not be perfect. There will just be a good baseline, I think, and then over time, exactly these type of questions will become more and more important because people ask, like, okay, I want to have the presumption of conformity, you know, like, or no, so, but I do not have that for that product. So please either do a product category or allow certain things to be done in a way that it gives me the presumption of conformity.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other question?
Okay, now I'm recorded. Now I really need to watch out. So you cannot accept this. Okay, and in that very moment, he's publishing it, and not only you are in deep trouble, because this is affecting many products around it. Okay, so this is a reactive update that you need to do. You need to solve the problem. There, for both, Cyber Resilience Act is actually establishing the practices that you have to adhere. There are regular updates, and there are updates that you need to do in a critical situation. There is a separate standard, by the way, for this as well. Okay. Please. You need a microphone, sorry.
So you said about this hash algorithm. So, for example, some scientific paper publishes that they found out a vulnerability, or the government actually says that they found a vulnerability. Does that mean that we, as, for example, product makers, have to watch entire internet for known vulnerabilities, or will there be some centralized place that will post known vulnerabilities that we have to take care of? Because the first one is actually really infeasible. We cannot scour every place to check if some product will be vulnerable or not.
Okay, so please, under no circumstances, don't watch entire internet. I'm struggling to finish my Netflix watching, and guys are putting movies every day in it, so I will never be done with that. So, jokes aside, look, there are specific databases for the regular updates where you need to look into. The CVE database, the MITRE used to be a standard here, and there is also one available from European Commission, from ENISA, that is also basically mirroring what was there. So I think that this is a good context. Mike is there.
Because I believe it's one of the most interesting developments that we have. So there is on one hand EUVD, that is basically kind of the mirroring from the CVD numbers. Yeah. But from the process, as far as I understand, the Europeans are going to use the Circle solution called vulnerability lookup.
Yeah. So and there is a place, it's not the entire internet.
CVE, this is like something we need to look at. It is like a lot of how you do the number query and so on in a distributed fashion, because CVE was all centralized, and the idea to decentralize it is a very much European idea.
Yeah, so in a nutshell, for these proactive regular updates, of course, standardization and European Commission through the agencies need to establish precise spot where you need to look, because you will be liable for that. But for this reactive part, nobody can give you context on that. For following reason, you might think that you have a problem with a SHA-20 in 2050, in the year 2050. But it actually could be the implementation, how you have programmed it. Okay, so it's not, when you are a manufacturer, it's not so that the algorithm is deciding about the security. It's a common misconception. Security hardening of everything around the algorithm is probably even more important than implementation of the algorithm itself. Hope I have answered the question. Okay. Good. So the next thing, we have already seen this slide with regards to the common criteria, or European version of the common criteria, and Cyber Resilience Act. To go into the context of common criteria, this would take us a little bit longer. So let's jump into the more complicated context. Now, here's a very important statement, fully in line with what I was saying before. It's not about how secure your product is, it's about what you do for its security. Okay? So it does not require any security evaluation or certification. Well, not so true for the critical context. Here are again the essential security requirements. Then there are now going into the weeds of the standard. Now, we will not read this everything out. No worries, I mean, because for each of these security requirement in the presentation, and even more the updated version that will be available now for your public review, for each of these you will find in the standard what does it look like, okay? And here I would just go through the couple of them simply to give you the deepest possible insight that is appropriate for this workshop that we have. So let's say security by design, okay? There is a description of activities that you need to adhere to, and it is a mandatory thing. So if you are programming applications on a secure element, or basically many of the standards will have something like that. You need to analyze the application, do the risk assessment, security requirements needs to be established, so you have to have security requirements. Trust me, this is not like common thing in a product development. It's probably the thing that you should be thinking about first, and most of the companies are doing it at the end. Like, oh, heck, we need to do something about security as well. And what you see here, this strange language comes from this standard. This is common criteria. If you would open this standard, you would find probably 1 or 2 pages explaining this thing here, let's say, reference and so on, SPD and so on. Let's just go through a couple of them. So no known vulnerabilities actually means that in the moment where you are launching your product, you have made it free of known vulnerabilities. What does it mean? Precisely what we have discussed before. You will get the access, or I mean, there is a public repository where you can find which vulnerabilities you need to take care of. These are known. There might be also other sources depending on your product and application. And then you need to make sure that this is passed. So basically for the smart cards, you are going to the evaluation laboratory and they're hacking the hell out of it in order to make sure that you don't have this vulnerability in there. So, okay. Okay, yeah, I'm almost done. I'm almost done. There is for each and every, as said, for each and every essential security requirement, we have this. You have been asking questions, so. Okay. Okay, excellent. Now, literally, I'm done with the presentation, more or less around the moment. Thank you for a reminder. But maybe we have time for 1 or 2 or 3 questions that we have not asked. Maybe from the online audience. Okay, guys, so thank you very much. With that, my show is over. And I'm handing it over.
Yes. Although a number of things that I'm going to discuss are not on the slides because I did not have the time to actually prepare that properly. But yeah, I see them. So what I am going to look at is so the one big point that I had from straight from the beginning was when we talk about resilience, we also need to talk about time. Why? Because we have 2 bugs ahead that both heavily affect also boot managers, and now that I had a discussion with a number of people building boot managers and operating system and so on for for special purposes, they checked it and they were shocked what happens when you have the rollovers. And there are 2 rollovers. That is one, that's the NTP, so network time, that is 2036 in February, and then 2 years later, it's the rollover bug because of the 32-bit time. And the interesting thing here for all of these type of bugs, and I think the boot manager standard is the only one who actually introduces it. When you look at the difference between between what happened in the year 2000 and what happens in just 13 years. The difference is that to fix the year 2000 bug, we had 20 years and a global effort to fix it. For the timing bugs in 36 and 38, we do not have the same effort. Again, the only standard who actually recognizes it is the boot manager standard, but it should be recognized by all of them. And not only this, we have to really prepare for this. And if there is something, in my point of view, that is resilience against time bugs. And that is something that at one point, like in the development of the standards, it did not come up a lot because they were much more about the details of the standardization itself. So what has to be done, how it has to be done, how do we cooperate, how do we, coordinate between, 15 ETSI and another, 20 Zenelec standards. And so that it was not so much about the actual details of it. And now that we look at it, there is a lot that is not clear. As I said, timing bugs is one. The other thing that we have also not properly addressed, in my point of view, or the view of other people, is the AI connection that we have to the CRA, because there's also that thing, the standardization request explicitly mentions AI, and also the part of the technical descriptions for browsers, for example, also contains AI. However, there are a number of things that are not addressed in the moment in the vertical standards, and I do believe that we still have to look at these type of things that are missing. And this is one typical thing that I would see as one of these things missing. The other part that I wanted to discuss a little bit, or is there a question so far? Okay. That is the whole part about the conformity assessment. So when you need to do conformity assessment for something like a boot manager, so how does it usually, or how do you interact or engage with that item? Normally, you engage with it automatically when you build a device. So there is a point where you have to think about how you deal with your boot process and how do you secure it. And we had that in the session before. Here's a question from Tim around what do you do as a manufacturer with that item when you do have a boot manager or a standard boot manager for your products that you use? What is your conformity path for it? And the interesting thing here is when you don't put it on a market, you do not have the need for that marking for that component. However, when you have something that you integrate even internally, there is a value to think about what it as a vertical has as in general as requirements, because that might be that the products that you have might do not contain certain requirements, and you want them to be included. You say, for example, I don't know, the timing bugs fix that you say, yeah, we want to have this because we have then the requirement more visible towards our other verticals that we also integrate. So there is a value to look at all of the standards as vertical standards when you build a product that has in itself maybe not a standard, or even if it does have a standard, to see if it is enough for you. Because the standard only is it's voluntary, and also it's kind of the minimum. It is not extensive. That means these standards are kind of a guideline, this is what you can use in order to get the presumption of conformity. But, I come from a world where people came to me after assessments, after their conformity, because they said, okay, now I'm a lawyer of the conformity, now I want to know if I'm secure. Because in the past that was very different. You had these schemes that were like, yeah, okay, you have like a checkbox that you like, checkbox check, and then it gives you a paper that says, yeah, it's compliant, but if you are more security aware, and like, as I said, in the past, these schemes were not as strong as they are today. There is a value to look at it from a different angle and to say, okay, like I look at it from a attacker perspective, for example, and this is like really what usually companies don't necessarily have, the capacity to have someone who looked at it from an offensive viewpoint, and especially boot managers as something that if it's compromised, it's a game over. So there is a high value in looking in these type of things a little bit more in detail, even if you don't have to, because there is a point where that is kind of a little bit shielded from what you have to do vis-a-vis what's like a good way of doing things. And yeah, that's like one aspect of it. Any question to that second part? Otherwise, I would continue with capabilities. So in the beginning, so that was something that a lot of standardizers at the time suffered with, because we had that understanding of, okay, capability is what determines risk. It's clear. So if a thing can do something, it is like either to mitigate something or it introduces a new risk. So when you look at boot managers, but it's not the only vertical where you have this. However, you get into a lot of details. So a lot of, how, like, I don't know, for example, updates, like what you can update, how you update it, who is updating it, so there is really a lot of detail that you also cannot necessarily put in all of that detail into the standard, because it is all very kind of focused on what the product is more than what the development of the boot managers determines. So because in other verticals it's different. In other verticals it's like, okay, you straightforward develop towards an application. You straight, up develop towards a certain, service product combination. For boot managers, that is not necessarily the case, because what you do is you build it kind of a start-up point, but the question is, how does it really integrate into your whole vertical? So into your whole product. What I looked at, and also the discussions that I had, nobody has a threat model for their boot managers. Why don't they have it? Because that is not what they're looking at. The product is not a boot manager. The product is a piece of hardware, for example. So the way how you should look at it, again, boot managers are in each hardware product, is something, where this standard can be helpful for you to determine what to look at. What is a little bit the weakness in the moment, but it is also a matter of time. We do not have the 3 years that you usually have for standard development. We had half a year. That is not a lot of time. So that means a lot of what we have defined already, like here and also in the operational environment, this is all there are parameters. That means there is a mean to put that into a structure that you can use and also determine and see what the problem is. For example, that is really meant for what the Germans are going to do. It's OSCE. So the idea here is that that standard can be transferred into an OSCE structure. This is why it is so heavily, like based on parameters or like the way how you can actually put that together. To have later on a better way to see how that aligns to your efforts for compliance and for the operational risks that you have with your product. The other thing that I wanted to dive question. It's a workshop. It's not a. Do you have any, is there anything that you want to know that maybe has not been discussed, or that, like either for this vertical or for the sanitization itself?
About open source boot managers.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So boot managers, when you look at them, they are not really off-the-shelf products. That is not that you normally do not or not very many. That is like a very small business that refers to off-the-shelf. Most of it, what is there, is open source. And what is interesting here is open source has an exception in the CRA. And when you look at, or at least I had a number of discussions that made clear to me that you have these two extremes. You have on one hand industry that also heavily engages actually in open source, especially core boot and so on, in order to have something that they can use and build their own stuff on top of it. However, the open source part does not need to have any compliance because it is accepted. But of course, the people who build boot managers as open source, they all work for industry. That is not something that you do in your spare time just for the fun of it. So the point where it becomes interesting is that the open source projects themselves, they do not have an obligation. So that is always in the with the person who uses, integrates it, sells it, whatever. But there is still an incentive for the open source community projects to provide everything that the harmonized standards actually provide. For the simple reason it makes it easier for integration. That is one thing. The other thing is also due to the fact that you usually do not do the presumption, that you do not put the boot managers on the market, but something else. And people do not use threat models in order to determine the risk for their boot managers. There is a very, very high incentive for all of us that the open source boot managers are well maintained and secure. And it is when you look at them, the interesting thing, or my observation, because I looked at a lot of CVEs over the last, I don't know, weeks and months, and what is very difficult is that boot manager and firmware bugs are not very well documented, or it's hard to understand what the actual bug is. When you look at the CVEs, there's a high-level description of something, and you say, yeah, I don't know. And especially when it comes to the IBVs or the part that is originally derived from open source code, but they know that it's so old that they cannot reference it anymore. This is what I realized that what was that? That was a bug that used an old implementation of EDK2. So that was not something brand new. It was something old that obviously got exploited and still is exploitable because they used something that was already outdated when they integrated it into their product. And for the big picture, it is really that thing that helping the open source community to get stuff done on one hand, and on the other hand, also being able to use what is produced, for example, with attestations at one point maybe, is going to help a great deal, especially for a lot of the stuff that I'm started with, like the timing bugs, for example, because they're actually fixed there for sure. And in general, because you have like, at least from what I looked at, a good development practice.
Would you suggest manufacturers who contribute to open source or actually build boot managers or whatever open source they are building or developing to become themselves open source software stewards?
In my point of view, it makes a lot of sense. So first of all, it is a way that is allowed. In the beginning, we had a discussion, like straight in the time around, you know, like after the trilogue and before it was published. The whole question if a manufacturer can be a steward. Because if, you know, like from the rationale, if a manufacturer can become a steward for the product that they put on the market, they have a lot less, you know, obligations. So the idea of the CRA is to say, for what you put on the market as a product, you have full manufacturer liabilities or obligations. And for everything that's open source that you produce, and I have a very specific reading of open source because I say, or like my viewpoint is, open source is when you offer it in a way that nobody else is needed for you to fork and maintain it. So when you have source available open source that only gives you the source but not, you know, like certain tools to do that, it is not open source under the CRA. That is my reading. It's not just code. It is also, you know, like the mean to produce that without any kind of dependency from an entity. Then it is clearly open source, and then again, my interpretation. But then you can have that split to say, oh, I'm a manufacturer for a certain product, and this is like where I have my full requirements. But for this, for example, component, a boot manager or whatever that is, I provide that open source. That is possible, and the Commission explicitly said that is also something that they actually like, for the simple reason that it also gives that, like, you know, potentially the opportunity for a number of industry stakeholders to work together when they share, for example, you know, like code base or like, you know, the function of certain things. And I do believe in the long run, there is an incentive for manufacturers, especially if they do not want, you know, like to have all of the obligations that they would have underlying anyways. You know, so the open sourcing, you know, like strategy is more about to say, okay, there is a part where we still do our due diligence, everything, but due to the way that we open source it, there's also something like an incentive for our partners to engage with us on a different level. And this is like that thing where I do believe that, especially for supply chain, open source components and so on, that is like the one of the strategies to you know, like get that actually done. Because when you have 1,000, let's say, or 500 or whatever dependencies, how do you deal with it? And when you have some of them on your own, or like integrated, or, you know, like changed for your purpose, you should really think about what you can do in order, you know, like to cooperate with others, not only to, like, you know, for two reasons. What makes the CRA so interesting as a law is it is very clear that the CRA forces you to talk into both directions. If you are a manufacturer, you have to talk to your clients, what do you need? And you need to talk to your suppliers, what can I get from you? And there is no law that I've ever seen where it is so clear that it is about communication. So yeah, it's like, obligations here and there, blah, blah, blah. But at the end, it is all about how do I understand what I have to do? And I have to talk to them to understand what I have to deliver, because just by what I see, and maybe even for what they deliver as a compliance part, it does not necessarily is enough for me to understand what I have to do and also where I do my compliance most efficiently. I believe there is a big incentive to open source components that are, on one hand, essentially enough for you to consider them an important part. The other thing is, what also became clear to me is the part where it becomes interesting for manufacturers to cooperate. The cooperation makes most sense at parts where you don't compete. For example, I don't know, update services. You do not make money with update services. So it makes sense that when you are in a field where you have manufacturers that share a certain market segment, to think about doing stuff together, developing the same technology, to kind of standardize their way of doing stuff. That makes a lot of sense, and that works best when you do open source. And I have seen that in the machinery part, that they started to look a little bit at it for certain aspects of it, because of course they have a competitive relationship to each other, but they have parts where they not compete. And at these parts, it makes a lot of sense to do stuff together, because nobody earns money with it. So there is a good, or it is like good practice to share your experiences, your problems, and your solutions with others. Is there any other question?
Because we spoke a lot about the open source, do you think that the companies, manufacturers, would prefer better to use commercial components, just because I'm using the open source component, but at the end of the day, I'm responsible if this component has vulnerability, and I'm responsible to manage this vulnerability. In my opinion, it's easier to use the commercial one and to delegate the responsibility to this commercial component. And when the vulnerability appears, they're responsible to manage all the vulnerability management.
That is a very, very good remark. Because that, one thing to debunk. If I have a commercial integration, I'm still responsible. If my contract partner doesn't do what we are contracted, I'm still responsible towards my clients. Then I have to do litigation against my suppliers. So I just move the problem, and I may have a litigation path later on, but it does not completely solve your issue. It only solves it in terms of you may have someone to blame, but if it's really someone to blame, it takes you years. It's not something that you can just, do this and then everything is fine. And that is a little bit the misconception. And also you have to, potentially to pay for every part on the way. Yes, open source is also not free. Open source is a puppy. So when you take it, you have to have the responsibility. But there's also something, and this is what might not be so obvious, but so when you do security, I do IT security since all of my life. And what makes it so great is that you can share what you do, and also that you have a lot, due to sharing, you also have that thing that you get a lot of improvements from people who criticize what you do, or you use it and find bugs and so on. When you have commercial products, that doesn't work really like this, because you expect shit to work. So there is something that is inherently different in the mindset of when you use it. And in CRA context, that goes even beyond that, because you can say, okay, I have this and this components, and you all like kind of automatically think a little bit beyond what you do as soon as you use open source, because you understand that you also integrate other people's code. And it is more conscious than just buying stuff and then expect it to work. It will also have bugs. It will also have these issues, but you have a harder time to actually see what's happening. And you have to rely on what the, like closed source component manufacturers promise to you. But the question is always, do you have a contract that allows you to actually look at it? Or do you get a binary that you just use? So the point here is like a lot about, it's not just about, can I give that obligation to someone else? Because you can't. It only looks like it. On a very, very superficial, level. And the other thing is, what is my long-term perspective of it? If it's something that is important for me and I cannot do it in-house alone, but it is like essential for my product, what do I do? And if there are open source components that you already use, that is a pathway already, it's like, yeah, I use so I should engage with that community, or fork it properly and give the parts that are security relevant back to the community. Or I get part of a consortium that actually does that. So an idea to say, okay, we have similar problems, let's take this and this part of the stack and find solution to it, and let our companies or whatever entities we are to deal with these particular problems. Did that answer your question? No, but it's really that thing that there is that notion of, yeah, I can buy my way out of my obligations, and I don't believe that works.
It's mostly a statement because in my experience, usually all of the people, when they heard about compliance, they all want to just externalize the risks and don't want to mitigate it. So for example, all will prefer to pick a commercial use just to be sure that in case of something, I could externalize the risks and don't deal with it anymore. But as you mentioned, it's sometimes, in my opinion, open source is better than a commercial, because as you said, it's the code is open to everyone. On a commercial one, it's closed and you don't know what is behind the doors. So in case of something, it could be more critical than the open source, but everyone could hack or just try and to make like home laboratory and try to exploit some. It depends on the type of risk that the company like to take, and it will be, I think, a big battle in the next years for companies, for manufacturers, what to use and to be compliant, because we all speak about the CRA, but to be honest, it will be very interesting when it will take in place and the certificate body will have to certify some products.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that it will be very, very interesting, because it's not just the CRA, we have also the AI Act and then a bunch of other things that you need to follow. That is not like the CE mark for CRA is only one part. You have also the European Accessibility Act. You have eco-design. So there is more than just this, even if you have a straight up product. But if you have complex products, you very, very likely fall into a lot more kind of regulations that you have to follow. And your CE marking is not straight up only this. You might have to add certain things on top of it, especially if you have user interfaces and stuff. So doing it open source has not only the, like, again, it really depends on the product or service that you provide, because some things are easier to open source than others. And also the question is, what is your business model? I have seen quite a bunch of things that is like an interesting business model anyways, where the product is fully open source and the business model is to provide services around an open source model, but the product that you have is exactly the same. What is the difference to other things? So sometimes you have, oh, you get a community version and you get a commercial version. Is that the same? In my point of view, it's not. Not necessarily, depending on what the community version really is. Yes, and the question, like, it is much harder to argue with market surveillance authorities when you have that, oh, this is a community, this is like, and you are the only single vendor. That is not going to work well. Where it works well is when you have a very clear, like, oh, this is open source, it's a product that we do not charge anything extra because we do not do anything extra. That's exactly what's in the repository, but we offer a service where we work for you, and the improvements may actually get back into the open source, or it's just, you know, like to integrate our things into your product. And in my point of view, that is a very, very good business model for the simple reason, or like in terms of compliance, because you are all in all of the sweet spots. And yeah, well, that's like not something that everybody can do. Again, like, you know, the business model might differ, that it's just, right, you do something so special that you don't want to open source only parts of it. Still, you have an incentive to have these parts open sourced, or you can have an incentive if it's not something that is, you know, like at the core of your business model. What I've also seen is that that manufacturers have, for example, an operating system or kernel or whatever, and they have one that is free and open source, and then something that comes with product capabilities that they assure exist and assure to be safe and secure. Like one example, I should not name any company, but there is I have seen like that model that I find really, really interesting. And the question here is like, you know, when you are a steward for these type of things, what do you really have to do on one end, and what, like, where does it move into the manufacturer obligation? And I believe that this is like something that over time needs to be discussed with market surveillance, and also on European level to have it like kind of enforced in the same way over the whole EU. Because at the moment you already see when market surveillance talks to open source, for example, that depends very heavily on the country of the market surveillance. So for example, in Finland, they have a very different way of looking at open source than, for example, in Germany. And that is significant, and it is significant for the European market, that they kind of get to the same understanding of what they are looking at. Now I have to check what the time is, because let me check. Yeah, we are actually done. When I see that correctly, 1600. Yeah. So, any last question? Okay, so thank you very much. And if there is internet, hello. Yeah. Now we have coffee, and thank you very much for your attention and for your question.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us for so late. I hope you had an interesting exchange during the workshops. And so my name is Laure Pourcin. I work for ETSI, the standardization organization. And And we were delighted to be in Zagreb today. It was really a sort of pilot to give you the opportunity to interact with the rapporteurs of the standards directly. So the feedback you will give us from that first session will be important for us. So throughout the standard development process, we have been paying a lot of attention to being inclusive, and we've made some efforts towards certain communities, in particular the open source community and the SMEs in Europe. So this last panel is dedicated to issues specific to the SMEs. So I would like to ask our panelists, whom you already know, except Anna Maria, to introduce yourselves and maybe give a few words as to the SMEs that you represent, each of you. So ladies first.
Thank you, Laura.
Anna Maria.
I'm Anna Maria Mandalari, assistant professor at University College London, but I also lead SME in Italy, Mulini SRL, where we do automated compliance for regulations, in particular the cybersecurity and tax. So we work on security and privacy for the Internet of Things, mostly.
Okay, thank you. I'm George Charkov, and multiple hats, but because you're asking about the SME experience, actually I do represent, I think, I don't know, James is here, but it's like 200,000 SMEs or something like that. No, less. Sorry? Only 45. We should include Latin America in that. No, this is the European Digital SME Alliance. It's a mega association of the digital IT companies. And also I was appointed as the technical committee cyber a long time ago, as I said, on behalf of SBS. This specific organization that was established, Small Business Standards is the acronym, and it's for adapting or following, is a mandate by the Commission to follow the development of standards in different standardization organizations, including scaffolding, lifts, and the other things, building, construction, and many. So we have representatives at the different technical committees, both at ETSI and Sense and Elect, mainly, ISO as well, to follow that. And my mission as that is, maybe I will say much before USR and CRA compliance and that part, with TC Cyber and then with the technical committee SAI, is to monitor and advise how applicable, affordable, and accessible actually to SMEs the standards are. And I will say maybe a few more words after that about the SBS conformity assessment method. But also with my other hat for 20 years, I'm managing European Software Institute in Sofia, which was initially with Central Eastern Europe. Now it's entire Europe, including some centers in Egypt and Brazil. We collaborate. Our main mission is to translate industrial standards for SMEs, to make them applicable for SMEs. So we started with software quality. Those of you who are in that area, CMMI, for example, it used to be like for the big providers, big companies, or defense, US government providers, or the Pentagon. Now, we translated that to SMEs, and it's focused on processes, the quality of the processes, which define the quality of the result. That's the major understanding. And then, of course, with the cybersecurity, resilience management model, cyber maturity that come from which come from Carnegie Mellon Software Engineering Institute, and the CERT that those of you, all of you know, the origin of CERTs, and that's the important thing. But I will say more.
Thank you, George. So now we are going to discover the third hat of Bruno. Bruno Banelli, our host, our rapporteur, and SME representative.
Thank you so much. Well, as Laura said, yes, and to follow up on George, the hats truly are multiple, and I'll be very brief. So in our capacity as rapporteurs for ETSI, we always try to take into consideration how we would feel as a small entrepreneurs when we would be presented with the standard like that, and the whole drafting process and the whole requirement process was always being watched from the perspective of somebody who will have to align themselves with the particularities of the draft. So I must admit it was relatively challenging, you know, the big wishes to make it as best as possible, but then also trying to make it as realistic as possible, taking into consideration that various SMEs have various prowess in being able to follow standards, let alone to apply them to a particular cause.
So maybe you can keep the mic, Bruno. We'll do the reverse for the next question. So what can we do to facilitate SMEs compliance with the CRA? Practically, can you give just a few concrete actions?
Well, I will give you the perspective from today. I mean, this was a mannequin event, so the first one. So now we probably know do's and don'ts for the next ones, and I'm glad that it is that way. As usual in life, I think that the communication is crucial. People are unaware. People do not wish to participate in the things that they believe do not directly, you know, cover them, because things will happen one way or another. They do not wish to engage their time, although this goes in their direct benefit or against them if they do not participate. So I truly believe that, you know, by pushing these kinds of events, by trying to properly communicate with SMEs and giving them enough information and encouraging them as usual to, you know, follow the information, participate in the public dissemination, this is probably crucial, because this seems to be the first big act that covers a variety of SMEs. It is no longer, you know, restricted to only the big ones, to only the critical infrastructure ones. This is actually probably the first thing that covers us all, both in terms of being a consumer of a manufacturer's product and of any manufacturer, whether it's a one-man band or a multinational corporation.
So information, awareness, engagement. George, any other suggestions?
Okay, well, I will start top down, not from the SME viewpoint, but from the standardization organization. So if we want to make standards that are applicable, affordable, understood well by the SMEs, we have to understand that there are two things. First of all, we have, and this especially for verticals, but to follow the same logic. You saw today, like in at least four drafts were presented or more. Here, that more or less the structure is the same. This doesn't come only from the harmonized standards viewpoint, but it's from the logic of security controls, assessment, and the activities that you need to do. So this is first thing. So you don't, once you read one, my understanding is once you read or understand one standard, you should be able to read all the others. That's the good point. The second thing is to be applicable for SMEs, I mean, understood, and well, you have to be clear with the use cases and implementation profiles, depending on the minimum set of requirements that are, I would say, for low risk areas, not about SMEs, so where usually SMEs operate, but this is not correct. And then you have other and another one. So that's what we have in most of the standards, is by use cases, by examples, or by differentiating different sets and levels, which means that it will be much easier that you go to the essential requirements and then you go with that. You start with that. However, this is not correct that what I said, this is not applied to SMEs only, because it is related to the risk. So you have SMEs that participate in the supply chain with products, services, or direct that are in a high risk area. This means that they have to be compliant to the high level. And I think that's the confusion sometimes. We say for the SMEs, minimum set of requirements. That's not true. Yeah, exactly. It was pointed out, but this should be well understood, and depending on the role of SMEs. To make them any, as I said, I represent SBS Small Business Standards. There is a simple method what we call SME or conformity test for the standard. Test assessment for the quality of the standard. And there are like 10 points there, among which you'll understand clearly, like normative references, for example. Are there all the references that are required really needed there? So if you have, sometimes you have normative references that are like 10 other standards, and this will be typical for here. I mean, it's CRA, because you have integrated products, and we all have to refer to the horizontal standards, ENs, by definition. So you have 5 normative references, then you need to study 4 other standards, or 5, which is too much. So this should be optimized. You start with that. Then we assess the implementation burden. I mean, is the cost? Do you need a training? Do you need additional tools? Do you need that? And that is very useful. Actually, I did apply this for TC Cyber, many standards so far, the technical specifications, and that was quite useful. So if you say the rapporteur that your standard is like 60% SME friendly, and what could you improve in that to optimize it? It works. Yeah.
Thank you, George. So SME-friendly standards is what we're aiming for. So I take this opportunity to mention, under the control of Nick in the back, that I believe Cyberstan currently has a call open for experts to do a standards review from an SME perspective, to do standards assessment from an SME perspective. So Anna Maria, what would you suggest to?
I have like 2 keywords here. One is automation, and the second one is tools. And I have 2 key points. One is automation and tools, and the other one is also for SME alignments with international standards that are similar to CRA. Why I'm saying this? Because when we talk about, when we consider the CRA, we tend to, so for the second point, for the second key point, we consider SME, European SME. But not only European SME needs to be compliant with the Cyber Resilience Act. So I was visiting Japan, for example, in September, and I was visiting a lot of like big players, but also small companies that needs to deal with CRA in 2027. And their question was, okay, what's the similarity with the actual current regulations that we have here in Japan regarding Internet of Things devices? So alignment with international standards is a key point for SME, because they don't have the resources for being compliant with 7 different standards. If they are selling in US, they're selling in Japan, they're selling in Europe. And the second one, so the first point, is automation. What does it mean? If we consider big player, they won't have problems with big compliance with the CRA, because they can afford the enormous cost that will come with it, right? So for the majority of the SME that I talk to, they don't even have a security team in their human resources. What does it mean? That they need to go to external consultants, first of all, for understanding on what they need to be compliant with. So which of the standards and which of the standards is for their products. And the second is the enormous cost of the assessment and the enormous cost of like maintaining this. So if we can have for SME automated tools that allow us to understand if that product, first of all, understand for which standards that product needs to be compliant with, and second, for assessing this. Just to give practical examples of what we did in our IoT testbeds with all standards, because this study is now will be done thanks also to Cyberstan with the Cyber Resilience Act. We took the consumer IoT ETSI standards that was published 2 years ago, 30365. We try to map that standard to network traffic analysis that we could do in our IoT testbeds, in which we have more than 200 Internet of Things devices. And in one day, we could test more than 100 IoT devices against the consumer IoT standards. And the results was a little bit scary. We saw that more than 75% of the Internet of Things devices that we had in the lab that were mostly consumer, so we're talking about cameras or smart speakers, were not compliant with the consumer ethics standard. So how many, and among these devices, 20 of them were like Panasonic, etc., big players, and the rest were like small companies that are producing these devices that will need to be compliant with the Cybersecurity Act, and they probably won't have resources for being compliant. So we need more tools like the one that we developed, more tools that are helping actually automating the way we assess the compliance.
Thank you, Anna Maria. Very clear. So automated conformance assessment is another very good and useful way to facilitate the adoption of and the compliance with the CRA for SMEs. So now that we talked about the burden side, maybe we can talk about the opportunity side. So what do you see the CRA brings as in terms of opportunities to SMEs?
Maybe I can start and we do.
Yes.
So I really liked, I don't remember in which event I listened to this sentence, but the CRA will allow SME to pass from security by design to security by demand. That doesn't mean that the security will be demanded by the European Commission, but will be demanded by the users of the devices. So there will be so much awareness, thanks to the Cybersecurity Act, that being secure will be an advantage for SMEs. And this is what I think will be the big advantage of being compliant, actually. You will have more markets, you can sell more, and internationally you will be recognized as a secure products, and users can buy the devices basically based on qualities that is standardized. This is the important thing. And security won't be anymore just in paper. There are a lot of devices that we have in the lab that claim to be secure, then we did the test and they are not, but will be certified. This is it's the important thing at this stage.
Thank you. So maybe new market opportunities for secure products. George, do you see other opportunities for SMEs from the CRA implementation?
Yeah, definitely there is a new market opportunity, but this morning I think I said that normally you consider any regulation or any standard or any audit that you need to do for your products or services as a burden. It's like limitation of including innovations and startups and other things. So the point is that security, resilience, by design and certified devices or products that you have, that turns the company to a competitive advantage because the market will not buy the others. I mean, we all used to have this quick and dirty approach for startups. You make quick and dirty your software application, whatever it is, and then we add security. With these standards, actually, we will require the exactly security by design, not only security by design, but the resilience by design through the supply chain as well, because you make your, including open source software that you do, libraries and the other things. If you don't handle, for example, as a software developer or integrator, you will never use software libraries or products, open source products that are not updated the last 2 years, right? This is part of it. You don't use them. We were talking about the vulnerabilities reporting, including open source products and libraries. So in the CVE, and actually that's the important part, actually following the vulnerabilities and weaknesses, not by CVEs and by CWEs or whatever, but also following the European, participating the European. This part of the mission for the SMEs, for example, we were talking the ISAC with the Digital SME Alliance, you know, ISAC centers, Information Sharing Analysis Center, that's mainly in the security part. So for most of the open source products, to be able to inform the SMEs about the vulnerabilities, including some that you discover, and they can handle that. And I think this is required by the standard, but I'm talking about the practical implementation. And this makes it competitive advantage. That's simple. Yeah.
Thank you, George.
Well, then I'll wrap it up. I like the CRA owing to the fact that we will stop normalizing selling of security as an added value, but you cannot expect me to sell you the product saying, you know, once you put it in your home will not burn. That's the same thing that's happening before CRA. So I'm selling you the product that's secure, and that's why you'll pay more. So this needs to be stopped, normalized, because as you're selling me the product that will not burn my house, please sell me the product that will not keep me vulnerable. This is a baseline, and this is how the things should go. Start selling me extra features, better products, or whatever, but do not keep me a hostage where you are telling me, okay, you will have to pay extra money if you want me to sell you a secure product. This will finally end with the CRA, so there will be a baseline, and no, you cannot burn my house, and no, you cannot sell me the product that's filled with security holes. Very simple.
Any comments from the audience you want to ask to our panelists?
Daniel did not agree with
the gentleman over there. What's your name?
I really have several questions, and they are mostly relating to micro companies that are in software development, so independent software vendors. Our state is subsidizing self-employment. So you can expect to have lots of software engineers who have started one-man band companies. And let's say you have such a software engineer, and let's say he or she has software for dentist's office, for dentist practice, as an example. Will they be able to survive 2027? Because, as I understand, they fall under default certification, or they don't have any standards. They fall under no verticals. They have to self-evaluate. They have to invent their own processes to make them compliant to this new regulation. They fall in this default compliance, as I have understood it. Will they get any help from whatever there is standardization? So this is like the first question.
Yeah, I'm not sure to have the answer to this. Maybe that's a more relevant question to address to the Commission.
Because here is the idea. You're representing small companies. What percentage of small companies that somehow comprise this field will fall under default, whatever the term is, default regulation or default category?
But here you are referring to the scope of the application of the regulation that was presented this morning by the Commission, and you noted that you have to have a product, and I'm not sure you are selling products. As an independent engineer, you're more selling services. You're doing custom development for your clients.
You're independent software vendor, so one band company, and you have developed a bit of software, some application, some program that is used, let's say, in medical field.
Okay, can you hand over?
No, it's a product. It's an application. Let's say.
For Camille, please. Yeah, maybe you can hand over your mic to Ivan, who may attempt to answer.
I will try to give an answer from my perspective. I'm definitely not speaking for the Commission. There are two answers that I can offer. So the first one is, if you take a look at the essential security requirements of the Cyber Resilience Act, and if you are not already doing things that are in there, which are, if you read them, really nothing special, okay? Then please don't get me wrong, you probably should not be selling this product at all, because it is very concernable. That's the first thing. So the essential security requirements in the Cyber Resilience Act are only the practices that simply make sense with or without compliance and regulation. The second answer that I can offer is actually that Cyber Resilience Act is helping you to establish appropriate level of the competitiveness regardless of how big the companies are. The level, the water level for the CRA is same for all. And it's simply something that needs to be done. Without it, you could either have an advantage by offering security or disadvantage if you're in a market where this is considered to be too expensive. Okay? So these are simply two answers. First, it makes sense. It should be part of the product anyway. Second, the competition and the competitiveness level is same for all. So it's actually helping SMEs. And at the end of the day, look, it's a self-assessment in the 90% of the context that you have.
Thank you, Ivan. Thank you, sir.
I would like just to add on. So it's really not, I'm not really concerned about the technical aspect of it, in a sense that you're an engineer and you do assessment and you do some risk analysis. What I'm concerned about is, let's say, bureaucratic aspect of it. Because when you self-assess, I assume, you have to produce some kind of documentation, which has to be in accordance to some sort of regulation. So will we have some help in this aspect so that, I mean, I can always produce a good documentation for myself, which I can use to prove to someone something. But will I be able to produce a documentation in accordance with this new regulation? And how complicated will this be? How will I be able to parse all of that and get to understand it? So that I'm sure that I'm doing a good thing, that I'm being compliant. Because as I understand it, a small company will have to self-issue sort of this CE certificate, if I'm not mistaken.
So CE is market entry regulation. You cannot enter the market without CE. That is already for almost all products. The only thing where it does not exist is software. So just to make that clear, that it is just that extra field. Everywhere else you have that already. The second thing is, I do believe that there are exceptions for certain environments because of the way how it's framed. So that means when you have market surveillance coming to you and say, okay, we want you to show us your compliance documents. If you fail, so you say, oh, I did not do it the right way, whatever, they will not give you in trouble. They will say, okay, we understand what that is a problem and this is what we expect. What they do not accept is if you say, I did everything and you didn't do anything. This is the fraud type of thing that you also had already in other CE contexts. So that will be exactly the same. I believe that it is even less of a problem than it is for any other environment. Because what you said, if you are an engineer, you should understand what you have to do. If you don't understand that, you should not engineering. So that is like the thing that, and I absolutely agree with George, the CRA is something that, that is like something that is almost naturally what you have to think about when you do engineering. So the part that is missing for the SMEs is like a little bit that don't panic. You know,
Thank you. Thank you very much, Fukami. And I don't want to hold you late because now is the time that we have to end this very interesting conference. But I want to thank you for challenging us. Thank you for coming to this event and daring to ask questions. Do you have more questions? Oh, okay. One more question, but the last one.
Thank you. So my question is, after seeing and hearing all of this today, something I am missing of the answers, the question I have. So someone mentioned CRA will not be recommended, it will be obligatory. Fine. But for whom? For the customers or for the manufacturers? As I understood, for manufacturers, right?
Anybody
And-
who wants to sell
Okay,
a product in the European internal
Yes,
market.
but then again, you have customers who can choose, will they go for better product with this conformity alignment or whatever, or they will not. Okay, there are some other regulatives, NIS2, DORA, which will, from the other side, force them to be in compliance, etc., but not to all customers in the EU market. So there's also, this is something unanswered, how to make sure everyone use it. Will these products which are currently not in compliance, because this is something new, also that there was a highlight on life cycle, product life cycle. So we have a product which is already here and it is not in compliance because it's already here. And now what? Do we need to revision that product, or we have to revoke it in some period, or how to enforce everyone? Thanks.
Let me give a very simple answer. So CRA is for new products, okay? So your existing product, if it's existing, okay, you know what? I think that Fukami would really like. No, come on, let's give him. Or Daniel, okay, yeah.
Oh gosh. Okay, I'm on the spot now. So basically, what Fukami was saying, what Bruno was saying, what I'm going to tell you is, old products don't have to comply with the Cyber Resilience Act because they're already on the market. Replacement parts aren't going to have to comply because they belong to something that was already there before the regulation hit. What Fukami was about to say, however, is very true. If you make an update that provides a substantial modification to the feature set and the cybersecurity risk of that product, you will have to file a declaration of conformity. There's really no way around that part of it, unfortunately.
Let's say that my customer pays a perpetual yearly license. Is that a product that is already on the market, or yearly license? It's not like one-time payment. It's a yearly license. Is that an old product or a new product with this kind of classification?
What functions?
If you don't update your product, so if you're selling him a yearly subscription for the same product, then that's the old product.
Exactly.
Thank you.
If you haven't updated, it's potential.
So maybe we should call it a day. George, you want to step in? Oh.
No, that question, to whom all the standards and the requirements from the CRA they apply, I believe, and especially SMEs, we have 4 different type of roles that we have. So you have providers, those who write software or make products. You have vendors, those who sell and implement eventually, those who maintain and support. So most of the SMEs, they will have external service like internet as a service, infrastructure as a service and whatever, software as a service as well. But and also the consumers, the end SMEs as end users. But when they are in the business that whatever infrastructure, software products they use, and they will fall in one of the use cases of all these bunch of standards that we have, they will need to apply that. So you see all these categories, and SMEs are everywhere, and especially about the maintenance I'm talking, and because of the products, and they take care about that. They should be aware of all these requirements, because it doesn't matter if they buy Cisco or open source, but it's in all cases they will need to apply all these principles, including risk assessment. SBOM, we are talking all the time about SBOM, but we have AI bomb, H-bomb, and the other things, and who is maintaining that? Somebody has to do it, and we speak, honestly, we speak, everybody is saying we update our products with DevSecOps or something eventually, but that's just declaration. Do we really do it in this way? I mean, so all this is compliance that we need to do. You see all this horizontal in most of the standards that we have. So it doesn't matter which model you get. You have to apply that.
Well,
Thanks for all your questions. If you want to continue the conversation, just contact us. I think we give you several websites as a reference, so we'll be happy to handle your questions. Thanks for your presence today, and thanks for the great organizations. I don't know if you want to say a closing word.
Okay, so last sentence before we close the session. Open consultations are open. So please, we want to hear your voice. Join the conversation with us. We have time up until the end of March, because in end of March, beginning of April, we are sending out the draft for public inquiry, meaning it won't be possible to modify them as easily. So please get in touch with us. We are really open and we really want to hear what you think. Feel free to contact us. We provided you with a lot of websites and you can find all the information. We have deep dive session for each vertical in the following weeks. So tomorrow we have 2 sessions. On Thursday we have 2 sessions. On Friday we have other 2 sessions. Please come and join. And I really, really want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank you, Laura from Etsy. I want to thank you, Anna Maria, George, Bruno. I want to thank all the rapporteurs. A special thanks to the Alghero Bernays University. They were so efficient and kind to host us. Thank you very much for those of you who are following us from home. And I hope I will see you all next stop in Torino on February the 24th.